we'll have a period of audience Q&A, and then we will make a few announcements, and then we will wrap up. So please think as audience members of questions you might have asked, and feel free to pop that in the chat. We will look for the chat, and since we're not a huge group, we'll play it by ear if we're gonna allow people to just put their their questions verbally. In the meantime, though, feel free to think about questions and put them in the chat, and we'll address them that way as well. So we hope to wrap up by 7 p.m. Central Time. Some of us may be joining you from outside of our time zone, and for those of you who are not in the Chicago area, you're still welcome to join us and learn. And we plan future virtual events as well that are open to people from different geographies and careers. The next slide, please. So great. So a little bit about NetImpact Chicago. We're part of the global NetImpact network. NetImpact itself inspires and equips emerging leaders, and that's people at all career stages actually, to build a more just and sustainable world. This can be through better forms of business. That could be through social enterprise. This could be through nonprofit management. But basically, think of it as a hybrid of people that want to do good in the world as well as do well. And our events span a variety of sectors. So we in Chicago are the professional chapter. There are plenty of great student chapters typically, but not limited to business schools, but they also exist at public policy schools, schools of environmental studies, etc. So we in Chicago strive to build an inclusive community focused on social, environmental, civic, and business issues with people that want to grow professionally and personally. So we're membership based, but you don't have to be a member to enjoy most of our events. We're open to members, non-members, students, chapters, and the community at large. And of course, these days we're open to people outside of the Chicago area. So if you know other people that are in the Midwest, but are not finding a like-minded community of people that are interested in these issues in their particular town, they're welcome to join our events virtually. So our events are related to sustainability and positive impact on civic life, on people, planet, and prosperity/profits. So traditionally our events have been together in person, but since the onset of COVID-19, we have gone virtual like so many other groups. We do have ongoing communications that we are more systematic about now that we are virtual. We have a newsletter or blog, which I'll mention more about in a second. And if you have some event ideas or would like to partner with us for events or other activities, contact us please at info@netimpactchicago.org. And our information is netimpactchicago.org is our website. We're on Twitter at NetImpactChi, and we're on Facebook at NetImpact Chicago, and we're also on LinkedIn as well. So feel free to look for us there also. Next slide, please. So a little bit about what we do. You can take a look at our website for a sampling of our events. We've done events on what is it like to go back to work in the we've done social events like happy hours and networking. We did a very enjoyable book exchange and book swap where we learned and also learned about each other. We've had an all-star panels on social enterprise and entrepreneurship. We actually addressed the topic of regional planning for a better Chicago. We've done a panel on technologies for social good. And upcoming, we plan in October to direct you to NetImpact Central. You can also think of them as NetImpact Globally Managed webinar on inclusive design. So designing for all, bridging the digital divide. So that's actually at netimpact.org. It's our parent organization, so to speak. And in the meantime, keep an eye out on our blog, which is the netimpactchicago.org/blog URL. And we've got, we typically update that monthly or every other month. And we have events, not only NetImpact events, but also events that be of interest from third parties and other people in the impact space. So we take a few breaks for our blog and newsletter over the summer and holidays. But we hope to have monthly updates for this quarter. So thanks very much for joining us. And next slide, please. I'd like to introduce Ed Byrne, our panel moderator today. Ed is with Morningstar, and he will introduce our distinguished panelists on the topic of water. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the introduction there, Neural. And thank you everybody for joining us and for our panelists for being here. I was telling Shilpa before we joined here, how excited I am for this because I was just out west. I spent 3 days in Oregon and 3 days in Montana. And really, as a Chicagoan, was the first time I ever experienced the effects of climate change in any way, shape, or form. And I realized how, insulated we are from climate change and any kind of real environmental issues. And that shouldn't really be our mindset. We have a precious resource, Lake Michigan, right here. And we really need to take care of it. So I'm excited to introduce our panelists today. Our first panelist is Shilpa Alva. She is the founder and executive director of Surge for Water, which is a Chicago-based nonprofit. Shilpa had graduated from Johns Hopkins University with a degree in chemical engineering and also earned her MBA while she worked as a consultant for years at Ernst & Young. Shilpa had been exposed firsthand to water scarcity as a child, and in 2014 decided to leave her private sector job and start Surge for Water, which has served over 1 million people in 11 different countries with clean water and sanitation. Our next speaker is Patrick Boyle. He's the director of sustainability at Sloan, which is a world-leading valve manufacturing firm. Patrick has championed 000 campaigns for zero water wasted, zero waste to landfill, and zero energy growth programs. Patrick has also developed corporate responsibility plans, education plans, and has helped build environmental stewardship programs at all of the firms he's been at to help foster a culture of sustainable thinking. Patrick also in his free time teaches a course on sustainability at Northwestern University. Our final speaker is Josina Morita. She is the commissioner of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Chicago. She was elected in 2016 and is the first Asian American elected to a county-wide board in Cook County. Commissioner Morita is currently serving as the chairman of the Industrial Waste and Water Pollution Committee and the Public Information and Education Committee. Amongst her awards, she's been included in the Spirit of the River Award, named number 22 of the 40 people who made a difference in the last 40 years by Friends of the Chicago River, and it's also been recognized as a national water hero by Water Now. So this is typically when we would applaud our speakers, but given the virtual nature of the setting, I'm just going to hand it off to Shilpa.
Let me unmute myself. Thank you, Ed, and thanks, Neural and the NetImpact team for inviting me to talk about Surge's global work and the global water crisis and how we are working to put an end to it. So with that, I'm going to share. I think you've got to stop sharing. Yeah. Let's see. Right. Yeah, so as Ed mentioned, I'm the founder and executive director of Surge for Water. And before I talk about Surge, just for those of you who may not be familiar with the global water crisis, it is quite significant. You're talking about, at this very moment, billions of people who lack access to this basic need. You have 2 billion people who don't have safe water in their homes, for over 4 billion who do not have a proper toilet. And in this time of COVID, when we talk about washing hands with soap as being the most effective way to stop the spread, 3 billion people do not have a way to wash their hands in their home. So this is a really big global crisis, one that takes many lives from something that is completely preventable, and especially lives of children, because water-related illnesses have one of the greatest impacts on young children who suffer from, illnesses such as diarrhea and other preventable such waterborne illnesses. So on that note, in 2008, actually, so just to clarify a little bit in the intro, so I went full-time into Surge in 2014, but we actually launched in 2008. So I want to give some credit to the NetImpact crew on this call, because when we launched in 2008 in Minnesota, our very first launch event was in partnership with the NetImpact University of Minnesota chapter. We wanted to do an event on campus, and we needed a campus group to work with, and we were looking for a like-minded group and we reached out to NetImpact, and they were really gracious in that partnership. So we have a joint founding story this, which I think is quite special, because I think this is actually since 2008 my first time back at speaking at a NetImpact event. So once again, grateful for this invitation. So started Surge in 2008, and since the very beginning, our vision's been simple. Like, we want to see a world where people have access to safe water and sanitation. And we do this through investing in solutions that provide this access. And really, when we look at it, right, like all of us, know that water is essential to live. Like, the human body cannot survive. I think it's like 3 days that you can survive at most without water. So of course you need water for life, but we also talk about the fact that water is important for somebody to thrive, right? So water leads to so many advancements in just basic life and livelihood. It allows children to go to school. So improving education. Instead of like walking long distances to collect water from a faraway source, mothers can now go to work and do other value-added activities, such as caring for their families. The World Bank talks about that for every dollar invested in water, there's like a $3 to $34 return ROI on that investment. So, we can keep talking about the fact that, in addition to keeping us alive, water is instrumental in so many other societal and economic parts of our lives and society. So with that, at Surge, we have done work in 11 countries since we started. And a few years ago, we decided that we wanted to focus in on a few countries so that we could have a more holistic full service model. And the countries that we work in right now are the Dominican Republic, Haiti, the Philippines, and Uganda. And in these countries, we have a focus to work on household, schools, and health centers, with schools being the most, being the focus, because, I mentioned earlier, the strong correlation between providing access to water and sanitation and the improvements in education. And it's also where we've done most of our work. During COVID times, we worked quite a bit in health centers, but traditionally we've been in schools. And we have households up here, but it's interesting. We're currently going through sort of like a program strategy review. And we're talking more about maybe focusing, when we talk about households, focusing more on the community level. So yes, households will benefit, but instead of doing household solutions like you see in this picture with a water filter, focusing our efforts more on the community wells and the community water sources, so benefiting households through a community solution. The kinds of things that we do, we have sort of two programs that we deliver in the field. We do WASH, which has water access, sanitation, hygiene, and then we do menstrual health. I'm going to focus on the WASH part since the topic today is about water. So with WASH, when we talk about water access and purification, we do everything from making sure that there is a source of water. This could be building or rehabilitating wells, protecting surface water such as springs, construction of rainwater harvest tanks, and also the water filtration, because even if you have a water source, it does not mean that the water is clean. Water also plays a close part of sanitation, because if you just have the water, but you don't have a proper place for people to go to a toilet, it doesn't, there can still be a significant increase in water-related illnesses. So we build toilets in schools, and then we also have a customized training program for basically practicing good hygiene and sanitation. So something that we take great pride on is that we have, through all of our solutions, we make sure that everything that we do is, community driven. And what that means is that the community is completely involved from the start to the end, right? So before even starting a program like this well that you see up here, we would have mobilized the local community. We would make sure that all the parts about from local businesses, the local technicians and villagers are hired for the construction of the rehabilitation. And what this does, this whole local source, like community-driven sort of model, really ensures that the knowledge and the skills and really even the equipment needed for these solutions is within the community. So when we talk about sustainability, which I know is a big part of what NetImpact does, and I know Patrick will be talking more about sustainability later, like for our projects to be sustainable, we make sure that the locals have full ownership of every stage of the process. And we have found this to be quite successful. And I'm happy to talk more about this in the Q&A later. So with that, since our start in 2008, mentioned this before, we've reached over 1 million people across 300 community schools and health centers. And through all of this, through the work that we've done, we have created jobs, because if you can remember back to the first slide I showed, when we talk about ending the cycle of poverty or addressing the cycle of poverty through water access, a part of that too is the jobs that are created in the solutions that we deliver. And so these jobs range from, the educators that are that are doing our hygiene training, the technicians that are building the wells, the project officers, the program managers, and even the administrative staff that pull this all together. So something, I don't usually show this model slide in presentations, but I thought this could be interesting to this group just because of the topic. So in my conversations with Ed early on, he was asking me a lot of questions of like how Surge works in the community and like what kinds of things we're doing and how, what is this model and how do we deliver this? So right at the center of this model are a woman and a child. And the reason you have this woman and child is because the global water crisis disproportionately impacts women and children. And a lot of times, even though they are the most impacted or affected, I should say, they are left out of the conversations and the decision-making processes. So we go the extra mile to make sure they are part of the conversations, both from a leadership, but also from a community involvement perspective. And then, so with them being at the center, it does not mean that we only serve women and children. We serve women and children as a way to reach the entire community. So by hearing their voice and making sure it's included, we're able to serve that entire community, which would then go to the schools, households, and healthcare facilities that I talked about earlier. At the very center, too, is our local implementing partner. So everything that we do is in partnership with a community-based organization. So an org that's already established in our communities that has a lot of influence. So they know other local leaders, they have close relationships with all of these other stakeholders that you see in these puzzle pieces around. So our stakeholders are civil society organizations, such as like youth groups or farming co-ops. It could even be a religious organization, right? So how is society gathered together and what's their voice? The government is instrumental as well, because the Sustainable Development Goals and WASH objectives, water objectives are a government mandate. So we have to understand what local governments are already doing to make sure, again, that our projects are really not disincentivizing them, but are working in collaboration so that together we can achieve more. I mentioned buying local products, so we have the businesses, and this little puzzle piece here is one of my favorites because, even though the environment cannot speak, we give the environment a voice, and we make sure that we analyze everything, all our impacts on the environment, and make sure that we minimize negative impacts to it, and as much as possible further the preservation through our trainings, but also through our infrastructure solutions. And then what this infrastructure in place, we have our menstrual health and our WASH programs. And we've built all of this infrastructure. So now what we need to put in on every program would be things like training and knowledge and financing and technology. And we sort of go through this cycle where we're assessing community needs, mobilizing local actors, delivering solutions, making sure we strengthen local capacity, monitoring and evaluating, and then really doing all of this so that we can achieve community independence, again, true sustainability. Outcomes, we look at are obviously infrastructure things like the wells and the springs and the toilets, but really the long-term impact are two things: the improvements in, I should say more than two things, I say two boxes, the improvements in the health, education, economy, well-being of the community, and also being part of the global United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And we talk about, we directly and more heavily, obviously impact goals 6 and 5 because of our menstrual health program, but we also touch on a total of 10 sustainable development goals. I am almost wrapped up because I know I'm probably over my time. Just very quickly want to say that in this time of COVID, when water and soap have been the most essential in stopping the spread, we customized our programming in the field to make sure that our communities had access to these precious resources. This is just one of many examples of the things we did. And here we're teaching a local a health center how to make their own soap so that their patients and their staff could wash their hands with soap. And we did this both in Haiti and Uganda, along with making masks and awareness education programs, distributing soap in some situations, installing hand washing stations. So a lot of just response related things. And now we're looking forward to moving beyond the response phase into the long-term resilience and back to the infrastructure that we are typically used to doing. I would love to, if there's time later, there's several people on the call that work in the corporate world and might be considering alternate careers. So I always talk about the fact that, I do all of this work because of my love for humanity. That's me hugging one of our community members in Uganda. And, this is, the work that we do is very, as structured as Surge is, and as much as it's growing, the work is still very personal to me. I'm incredibly passionate about it, and I feel blessed every single day that this can be a mission that I can be part of, and that I'm able to do my part to help address the global water crisis. So that's all I have right now, and I will stop sharing and hand it back to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Shilpa. I really appreciate you sharing with us the noble calling that you've been through. And I think the human-centric and community-centric way of sustainability is an interesting and awesome way to think and go about making change. So thank you. And also thank you for correcting my botched intro. I appreciate that.
Sorry for correcting it.
But next we have Patrick Boyle, the Director of Sustainability at Sloan. And Patrick, I assume, yep, you have some slides. Cool.
Got it. All right. Let me put that in presentation mode. All right. First off, thanks to the NetImpact group for having me here. This is greatly appreciated. And thanks for putting me in a tough position. I mean, I'm being bookended by two amazing water stewards here. So I'll do my best to try and keep up with both of them. So today, what I'm gonna do, take you on the business, the corporate side of water stewardship. And so I work for Sloan Valve Company. We're a global manufacturer of commercial restroom fixtures and fittings. That happy looking guy on the right hand side there, that's Mr. William Alva Sloan. He founded Sloan Valve back in 1906 when he created the Royal Flushometer. His device back in the day was to replace the tank and chain toilets of that time. Those used anywhere between 10 and 12 gallons of water to flush a toilet. His flushometer used only 6. So it was created as a water savings device. Construction was booming back in the early 1900s. And in his first year, Mr. Sloan sold only 1 flushometer. So he was a very persistent man, knew that he had a great invention. So he expanded his sales techniques and moved up to Milwaukee, Detroit, so on and so forth. And his efforts paid off. In 1907, he doubled sales and sold 2 flushometers. So luckily he kept going, and we are who we are today. So we do sell products in more than 70 countries worldwide. And we've recently, well, not recently, back in 2015, we partnered with the Cubs. So we have all of our products in their spring training facility in Mesa and here in Chicago at beautiful Wrigley Field as well. And we use this as an education opportunity to get in front of large people that we don't usually get in front of. So if you've ever been to a Cubs game, obviously not this year, but you'll notice that there's a bunch of information in the restrooms talking to people about water stewardship and how to save water and so on and so forth. So these are the products. This is my world that I live in. Not very glamorous, but it is. It's so we manufacture, like I said, fixtures and fittings for the commercial setting. We don't do anything for your home, so you won't find a stone product in your home. Sensor faucets, soap dispensers, hand dryers, water closets, flushometers, health sinks. This is what we produce to help our customers and stakeholders reduce their water footprint. There's been a big trend recently, and for good reasons, to improve hand sanitation, right? We all want to make sure that we're washing our hands properly. So there's been a big push recently for sensor faucets and sensor soap dispensers to help people wash their hands properly and effectively. So we do produce all those products for your commercial landscapes. Even though Mr. Sloan was thinking about water conservation way back in 1906, it really took a while for the rest of the world to catch up, at least here in the US. So one of the big factors that really pushed water conservation and water stewardship was EPACT, the Energy Policy Act of 1992. And it sounds crazy, but yes, it took an Energy Policy Act for the US to reduce its water consumption. So the Energy Policy Act or EPACT, it's a US act that was passed by Congress and set goals to really reduce US independence on petroleum and to really help improve our air quality by addressing all these different aspects of energy supply and even demand. So we're talking about alternative fuel, we're talking about renewable energy, energy efficiency, and even touched on clean coal, which, you know, was kind of an oxymoron back in the day. But the government knew that potable water had a big energy footprint. When you think about the amount of energy it takes to extract water from its source, whether it's a lake, an aquifer, a river, or a stream, it takes energy to pull that water out. You got to pump it, you got to treat it to drinking quality standards, you got to pump it to the end user. In some cases it's heated, where it's then used by the end user. From there, it floats back to a treatment plant where it's treated again. Then usually it's just released back into the environment. So a very energy intensive operation. Along the way, we've had some other influences to help us really look at water conservation. USGBC and LEED was founded back in 1993, 1994. It was one of the first green building frameworks released here in the US, and it focused on many different aspects of the building, but one of them was water conservation. Cal Green, anybody who has any project work or has ever been out in California, Cal Green was actually the country's first green building code. It's also formerly known as the California Green Building Standard Code that was released back in 2010. So I think there's just more awareness on water conservation. It's a little more difficult here in Chicago. We live next to the world's largest surface freshwater source, Lake Michigan. So water doesn't really seem to be on the minds of most folks here. But when you look at what's going on out in California and Arizona with really dry and drought conditions and elsewhere in the globe, there is a definite need for water conservation and good water stewardship. So again, this is a world that I live in. So when you look at what's been going on with flush volumes, and I'll get to why I'm talking about all these toilets and stuff here in a minute. It's not just because I work there, but flush volumes have really kind of reduced greatly over the past few years. EPACT was the main driver back in 1992, forcing any new installation of a water closet to go from 3.5 gallons per flush down to 1.6 gallons per flush, cut it in half. And it's continued to decrease to this day. It's gone down to 1.28, now even lower. It's not on the slide here, but we have 1.1, even 1 gallon flushes. So really reducing that water flowing through our fixtures. On the urinal side, we've gone from 1.5 gallons onto 1 gallon, quarter gallon. There's even water free. There's devices out there that there's no water needed to effectively flush a urinal. So really looking at ways to kind of think outside the envelope and effectively transport waste outside of the building without consuming copious amounts of water. This is a good little chart here to kind of show you the evolution of flush volumes, at least on the water closet side. So back in the 1950s, it was typically about 7 gallons to flush waste out of your home, your office, your school. That was just common practice, and it's really evolved throughout the years. And now, like I said, we're at about 1.1 gallons per flush. That's over an 80%, almost an 85% reduction since 1950 on the indoor commercial side of things. So we're really moving in the right direction. And what's great is that when you look at overall water consumption in the US, it's really declined over the past 15 years in internal water use, so water that's being used inside buildings. So even as the population continues to grow, our water consumption has been declining over the past 15 years. So why is this important? Why am I talking about all this toilet talk? All right. So it's interesting when you look at the biggest consumer of water in buildings. It doesn't matter what building it is. It could be an office building. It can be a hotel. It could be a school, or it could be a hospital. The biggest consumer of water in all of those facilities is the restroom. So that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the easiest place to go and look and start saving water in your operation. So if you have an older building, or if you have old fixtures and fittings in there, take a look at that. That's a great way to start saving on water. Why is it important not just to be a good water steward, right? The cost. So the cost of water, it's still, in my opinion, and I think many within my sandbox would agree, the cost of water is still greatly undervalued. We pay water is so cheap, it's almost become an afterthought, but we're starting to really see that change. What you see here is the consumer price index. It's a little out of date, but it's not too far off. When you look at the various utilities that are on the chart here, so green, natural gas, you saw back in the mid to late 2000s, it was really escalating. If you owned a house back in that day, your gas bill was going through the roof, right? Then all of a sudden it crashed. The price of natural gas came plummeting because of fracking, right? We found these huge oil shales in the US, price of natural gas came down. But when you look at electricity, natural gas, postage, so on and so forth, everything pretty much trends in the same direction right here. But water and sewer continues to rise faster than any of those other indices. So water and sewer right now is probably the cheapest it's ever going to be. It's not going to get any cheaper. So not only are we doing being good water stewards by reducing our water footprint in our homes, we're also going to end up saving money, right? So cost of water and sewer, as they continue to escalate, anytime you can save water and sewer, that's a good thing. When you look at the average water rates increasing, basically on average about 7% across the country. Some cases it's gone up 25%. Here in Chicago and other places like Austin, Charlotte, San Fran, increases of 50% over the past 5 years. So if you're paying a water bill locally, you've seen that on your water bill. The price of water is increasing, and in some cases dramatically. Real quick case study to show the impact of when you're talking about water reductions per water closet, per urinal, per flush valve. Doesn't sound like a lot of things, but when you scale it up on a large project, this is a great example of that. So the Century Plaza Towers, located in Los Angeles, two beautiful office towers, 44 stories, over 2 million square feet of space. They certified to LEED Gold. They were able to reduce their water footprint by more than 21 million gallons of water by simply retrofitting commercial fixtures and fittings. So what we were able to do is we helped them install water-free urinals. So going from 1 gallon per flush down to 0, that's a big deal, especially when you scale it up over that many floors. Water closets went from 3.5 gallons down to 1.28 gallons, resulted in over almost 9 million gallons of water saved. Simply by swapping out the aerators on their faucets, helped them save almost 6 million gallons of water. So it can be a very, very simple process to help you save and reduce your water footprint just by simple retrofits and not spending a lot of money to redo your entire restrooms. One thing that I wanted to talk about was the water, energy, and food nexus. When you're looking at water savings, it goes beyond, well beyond just the the restroom, right? So usually people talk about the water energy nexus, about how those two are interconnected. Sometimes they tend to leave off that food aspect of it. Those are very, very closely related, right? You need water to produce energy. You need energy to extract and deliver water. We need water and energy to produce our foods. So one of those cogs goes out, it can really impact those other two systems. I was talking earlier about EPACT and how the government knew that potable water was very, very energy intensive. We still consume 13% of our total electrical energy goes to heat, treat, and pump water. 13% of our entire electrical demand here in the US. That is a big, big number. How big is it? Sometimes it's hard to wrap your head around it and say, oh, 13% doesn't sound like that much. Well, if you broke it down, it's basically about 50 billion kilowatt hours per day, enough to power 4.5 million homes for an entire year. We use that much energy just to extract, push water around our infrastructure. And when you look at what the UN is saying about population globally, it's going to surpass 9 billion people by 2050. So we really need to start looking and conserving our water so that we have it for these other resources. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the Alliance for Water Stewardship. So the Alliance for Water Stewardship is a global organization made up of members from leading businesses, nonprofit, public sector agencies, academic institutes, with the collective goal really of promoting responsible use of fresh water. So they've been really successful at bringing in respectable groups under their board, like the Nature Conservancy is one group, the Pacific Institute, World Wildlife Federation, the UN CEO Water Mandate, the UN Environmental Program. So a lot of great people helping steer this group in the right direction. And at the heart of this group is the Alliance for Water Stewardship standard. It's a strategic framework to help companies identify and mitigate water-related risks with their direct operations and supply chain. So it's built a lot like your typical ISO standards on a plan, do, check approach to really continually improve, and can be and the standard itself can be implemented in just about any sector. So it's facing any type of water-related risks, whether it's a quality risk, whether it's a quantity risk, or so on and so forth. So one of the key aspects about this standard is that it's not just about water use within your four walls, within your business or your company. It looks at water use on a watershed basis. So you're really looking at how water quality, how your water use on your facility is impacting the entire watershed or the entire water basin. So a really amazing group. We're proud to be members of it. Sloan itself, we're going after to get certified by the Alliance for Water Stewardship Standard at our headquarters here in Chicago. So looking to potentially certify early 2021. So stay tuned for that. But that's all I have for now. Glad to answer any questions you guys might have in the audience Q&A. With that, I will stop sharing and pass it off to Josina.
Thank you, Patrick. Hi, my name is Josina Morita. I'm a commissioner at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. For those of you who live here in Cook County, I always say we're the most important agency that nobody knows exists, but we treat all of your storm and sewer water. We actually don't do drinking water, which is what we're most commonly asked about. And, you know, we're unique here in Cook County. We have what are called combined sewer systems. And so that means that our storm and our sewer go into the same place. And I'll actually try to tie some of both what Shilpa and Patrick talked about into the topic around water reuse and water recycling here in Illinois. So I'll start at the beginning for me, where I grew up in California under drought conditions, brown lawn, short showers. Patrick talked a little bit about, you know, reducing toilet tank. We used to do it the old-fashioned way and put a brick in our toilet to reduce our toilet flush flows. And moving to Chicago about 20 years ago was really just kind of amazed at how little we think about water, let alone how we think about water here. So as it was said earlier, the Great Lakes, including Lake Michigan, hold 90% of the US water supply, 20% of the world's fresh surface water. And here in the region, we really take it for granted, right? We think that all of it's ours, and that it's endless. And, you know, I think that there's a lot of opportunity along with responsibility here in the Great Lakes region. I was recently appointed to the Great Lakes Commission. And it's a good reminder that, you know, not only here in Chicago and Illinois, but we share the Great Lakes not only with multiple states in the United States, but also multiple provinces in Canada. And, you know, once that water is gone, it's gone. So one of the issues that's been really passionate for me is not just how, you know, we look at water and water conservation, but how we think about water more broadly. One, that we think about it at all, and, you know, that we take it as a very serious responsibility, but also the concept of this idea that there's good water and there's bad water, right? And so we use good water, which is only drinking water. And as soon as we use it once, it's done. Right, so rainwater, storm water, wastewater are all kind of considered bad water that goes down the drain, you know, that goes down the toilet, that goes down the sewers, and once it's down there, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, downstream. And there's a huge kind of possibility if we change the way that we think about water, to both conserve, but also to reuse and save not only water coming out of the Great Lakes, but save energy, as Patrick talked about. And actually create new industries around this idea. So Illinois, unfortunately, is one of a dozen states left in the country that doesn't allow for non-potable water systems. That means that we are required to put potable drinking water, both to flush our toilets, for manufacturing, for any use, it has to be drinking water. And so if you think about the water spectrum and you have drinking water as the cleanest water that you can think about, then you kind of have stormwater, rainwater, and then you go to industrial waste and wastewater. We only use the purest form of drinking water, even when the end use doesn't require it. Right. So why do we need to use drinking water to flush our toilets? Why are we using drinking water for manufacturing, for washing down our streets? Right. And so changing the way that we think about water is only using pure drinking water for everything, and everything else going down the drain and being trash. Thinking about how we can use rainwater harvesting and gray water systems for end uses that match it. So for instance, MWRD, we treat waste and stormwater. The water that we re-release out of our plants is cleaner than the river waters that we put the water back into nowadays. In California, they are taking treated wastewater and turning it into bottled drinking water. So the whole idea of how we think about water, that water is becoming this renewable resource that we can use multiple times, and that you can take the dirtiest water that you can think of and use it for the highest end use. And so there's a lot of both opportunities for conservation. There's a lot of opportunities for conservation. Sloan is a leader in some of the water reuse toilet flushing systems, some of which we can use in special permits in Illinois. And then also thinking about, you know, manufacturing and industrial, and Chicago provides a unique opportunity because our wastewater treatment plants are so close to 2 major airports and an entire industrial corridor. So just to give like a tiny example of what's possible, if you look at our Stickney plant, which is out in the western suburbs in Stickney, it's the largest water treatment plant in the world. Tons of industrial right around it. So there's a tire manufacturing company right next to our Stickney plant. Just as a pilot, they want to take 1 million gallons of treated wastewater a day over drinking water. That's just one potential pilot. So if you talk about even getting 3 pilots at that scale off the ground, we're talking about 1 billion gallons of water a year saved. And that's both water saved, it's cost savings for the district to not have to treat all of that wastewater to the highest standards for release. It's also cost savings for the tire manufacturing company that's not having to buy pure drinking water. So I think there's a lot of opportunities I think NetImpact talks about kind of good and good. I talk about green and green, right? That you can be environmental and think about new ways to make money and build industry and create jobs here in Illinois. And that water reuse and water recycling is one of those huge opportunities that we can really think about. How do we move this in a region that matters? And it's unfortunate that we're one of the outlier states across the country that isn't looking at this yet. But there's a lot of work to do. I wanted to kind of start with one topic, and happy to answer other questions about MWRD or any other topics as we move forward.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Josina. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Shilpa, for the insight from very different backgrounds, but both all wanting to be stewards of water. So I appreciate that. I have a few questions, and then we can toss it over to the audience. I think the first question that I would want to ask, we talked a lot about how changes can be made, especially you, Josina, about treating potable water and putting it back in to society, into the rivers, maybe making it into drinking water. Is there anything that we can do, somebody who doesn't have the ability to change something at the municipality level or at the the private sector level, or doesn't run a nonprofit? What can we do on our own, whether that's voting or actually something we can do in our home to be more a better steward for water?
Do you want me to do that?
Yeah, you can take that, but it's open to
anybody. I can start. I mean, one, I just want to make the quick point that anybody can change local policy and state laws, right? That these are things that, as individuals and advocates, that are part of participating in small d democracy. And so to remember that just because you're not an elected official or anything like that doesn't mean you can't change policy. And in fact, that's most of how we do change policy, is particularly around environmental issues, is to hear from residents and to hear from communities around these issues. One is voting, like you said, and just getting more civically engaged around these issues. I joke that we're the most important agency that nobody knows exists, but for a long time, we're on the ballot county-wide. Very few people know that we exist, let alone what we do, let alone who's running. And so being an informed, voter on these issues and voting for people who are more environmentally minded and who are willing to not just kind of go and be bureaucrats, but really go and be advocates is really important. But I also think that, again, I think there's a lot of hearts and minds work that has to happen around environmental stuff beyond the technical and the policy work, which is, if we create these different non-potable water systems, we also have to create the demand. And we have to create the incentive and the buy-in from the consumer side to actually purchase these and utilize these. I always say there's millions of laws that exist, but if people don't actually believe in them and don't operationalize them and live them out, then they don't mean anything. And so I think that there's a lot of work to do around that. I've done, to kind of educate people, I've tried to do some fun things. So last year I created Chicago's first effluent beer. So to take the dirtiest water that you can think of and take it to the highest end use, which is to drink it, but to try to do it in a very Chicago way, which is beer. Actually, just a few weeks ago, I did an Asian carp burger event, again, to educate people around the issue of Asian carp and protecting the Great Lakes from invasive species. And one of the things that we need people to do, we can create a whole manufacturing system for processing Asian carp, but if people aren't going to actually eat it, there's a lot of work to do to break down that stigma. So I think as, people who are engaged and passionate about these issues, there's a lot of work to do around just changing the culture and changing the mindset.
Certainly. Thank you for that answer. I appreciate that. That makes sense. So, one thing I wanted to touch on was, when we think about water scarcity, I think it's easy to think, okay, maybe it's a drought in Africa or a shortage or contamination in South America, but we don't think so much about locally and in developed countries. And I wanted to ask either Josina or Shilpa, maybe you can both talk about this question. What is going on in developed countries in regards to water scarcity? And is there some kind of social, racial injustice that's going on around water scarcity in developed countries like our own?
Sure. I can start with that, but Justina, you have more experience on the domestic space. So yeah, so you're absolutely right, Ed. Like, when we talk about the global water crisis and even Surge's mission, right, we're focused on, countries, people who are living in extreme poverty. And like, it's so obvious, like it's blatantly obvious that, there's no water because you're walking that 6 kilometers a day. And we tend to forget that locally, there are situations where people can't afford to pay their water bills, or like what's more popularly known would be like the Flint, Michigan situation, right? Like every time I speak on panels, I'm always asked like, well, what are you doing in Flint, Michigan? Are you doing anything in the tribal areas or the native areas? And just from a resource standpoint, like we focus globally, but I absolutely think that there is a correlation between communities that lack access and just like, we look at systemic racism or environmental racism, and why are certain communities more, I guess, suffering more from this lack of access. I'm honestly also learning a lot more about the local space. That's not my area of expertise. And, just with what's happening in the country and the backdrop of what's happening, I've taken it upon myself to start actually educating myself even more about local issues, whether they're here in Illinois or across the country. And, I know like Navajo Nation has significant issues. Obviously, I was just on a call with somebody a few days ago about just the fact, like, it's not just Flint, Michigan, like Detroit has water issues, right? So like there's certain things that hit the press. And I know when we were planning, Justina, you can probably talk about like Chicago and like what would happen with utilities here and like, the bills, but yeah, I'm still learning, but there's a global water crisis, and there are definitely parts of the U.S. that are, and people in the U.S. that are also subject to the issues related to it.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, yeah, I think a lot of times we think of access to water and access to quality water and affordable water as a third world over there, kind of an issue, but there are issues not only, as Shilpa talked about in Flint, Michigan, but there's issues right here in Chicago and Cook County in terms of access to quality water, affordable water, and ensuring that kind of from a public health perspective and an equity perspective. So Chicago is a really old city. We have lead service lines in huge portions of the city of Chicago and Cook County. And we've talked about, you've probably seen in the news, the issue of lead contamination in our water from residential usage, but also at schools and park districts. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of replacing lead service lines and protecting our systems from lead, both in terms of replacing lead service lines, in terms of pumping phosphates through the system that provide the protective coating, removing old brass fixtures that until the 1990s had high percentages of lead directly in the fixtures, which the phosphates can't protect people from because it's the last point of entry. Out of faucets, there's a lot of issues around access to clean, affordable potable water here in Chicago. So people in Chicago get their water from the Chicago Department on Water. There's a few other places, Evanston sells water, but there's still huge parts of Cook County that are dependent on well water that gets contaminated. I live right next to Morton Grove and went to a gym in Morton Grove here in the north suburbs. And I would see notices on the water fountains at my gym saying, you can't drink the water today. And that's in a relatively middle class, relatively affluent suburb here in the north burbs. You've probably heard some stories down in the south suburbs of the privatization of water and people getting $1,000 water bills, people getting cut off. Oops, sorry, my lights are on a timer. And so those issues around access to clean water, access to affordable water, and then also, there it went again. This is technology. My husband puts in these fancy things and I don't know how to use them. But also, as Shilpa talked about the issue of water shutoffs, we talk in Chicago, it's illegal for private companies to shut off people's heat during the winter due to inability to pay. But until recently, it's been completely legal for the city of Chicago to shut off people's drinking water due to inability to pay. And we found that the majority of cases in Chicago and across the country in terms of people not paying their water bill, one, it can be because people can't afford it, which they should still be able to have access to clean drinking water and potable water for showering because it's a public health issue. But oftentimes it's landlords not paying the water bill, and it's the tenants that pay, or it's a senior who either is, for different reasons not able to pay their bill, or forgets to pay their bill, or goes into long-term medical care, and their kids and their grandkids are living in the building and their water gets shut off. So the mayor of Chicago just recently has enacted a program to help people and to put a temporary moratorium on water shutoffs due to inability to pay. But there's lots of issues right here in Chicago around access to quality water, affordable water, and really understanding that access to water needs to be a human rights issue.
Got it. Thank you both for answering that question. Last question on my end. A lot of people here at NetImpact are just looking to learn and grow, and there's a lot of people that are potentially thinking about switching careers. And I just wanted to ask all of you a little bit of an input on how one would go about getting into water sustainability and working in this arena, whether that's different new kinds of new industries popping up or an education route to get into water. So if you could just provide a little bit of insight on what you think would be best for somebody in that position looking to get into the industry, that'd be great.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I didn't grow up saying that I want to be a water steward at a flush valve company, but it's kind of funny how things work out. If you're interested, whether it's water or energy or any type of natural resources that you're looking to be a good steward on, there's a lot of great groups here in Chicago that focus on this, right? NetImpact, the local USGBC chapter here in Chicago. Volunteer, get out there, volunteer for these different groups. It's hard nowadays to go to these different meetings, right? I mean, we're doing this virtually, which is fantastic. So we're keeping it going. But when these start to reopen, go to events, meet the people, see what they're doing, talk to them, figure out how they got into their positions. There's a vast amount of knowledge out there. And I've always been a huge enabler of going out and just talk to people. If you've done your research, I know a lot of today's youth do. My kids do research on everything. It's insane. So if you're doing your research on different topics or people, find out where they're at. Go talk to them. Drop an email. Make a phone call. Don't be afraid to reach out to people, because it seems like, at least in this sandbox that we're all kind of in right now, most people are really open to talking to you. We all want to share different ideas. We all want to empower the next generation. So don't be afraid to reach out, volunteer, talk to people. That would be my advice.
Yeah, and I guess I would add to that, Patrick, on the volunteer. I can pick up from that piece of it. I don't recommend that you go out and start your own nonprofit, because I did that, and that's a whole different journey. But if anybody is interested in starting their own nonprofit, I'm happy to talk to you offline about that. But there's organizations like ours, and I'm sure so many more that are in Chicago that require resources and skills. And we recruit skills-based volunteers. So whether that's finance or marketing or fundraising, just things that you're doing in your day job, and you just want to get a feel for the nonprofit sector, you can definitely reach out to me, to Surge, and that's an opportunity. But it's not just us, right? There's several other organizations in the space, whether you want to work in the local or global sector. I would also say that, just as you're, if you're looking at a career switch, yeah, exactly as Patrick said, like talking to people and having those introductory calls, like just to give you some perspective, like my background was not in international development. I have an engineering background and a business master's degree. And my school was live in the field, learning from our community leaders and local leaders and local governments, and just, learning alongside them. So I really learned on the job and then adapted our programmings to that. So if you follow, just speaking very idealistically here, but this is what I believe, is just, where's your heart? Like, what are the things that drive you? If sustainability is important and water sustainability, which part of that is important to you? And then, follow that path and follow that journey, and then the people will start appearing and you can learn. It doesn't have to be your career right away. It can be learning through volunteering, through just attending webinars like this, reaching out to people. And I feel like now, after doing this since 2008, I am an expert in water in the global space, but I didn't go to school for it. I learned about it like by doing it and doing the work, the hard work, and just respecting the leaders and experts in that space.
Yeah, I think I would add, I didn't grow up thinking I'm going to be a water reclamation district commissioner. But I think in addition to the volunteering and, kind of just engaging more, which is hard during COVID, is to look at your own company, to look at your own space and think about how can you become a leader internally in your space and leverage the power of your company or your position or your network for environmental causes. I think, that's a really powerful thing. The idea that you have to be in a nonprofit or a specific, environmental organization in order to do this work is, I think we need people everywhere. We need people in these corporations, and we need people, in all of these different spaces to be echoing these kind of messages and thinking about strategies from their particular standpoint. So how, at a particular corporation or a company, how can you be reducing your water footprint? How can you be an advocate around policy? How can you be creating new strategies and frameworks about how your industry can be more environmentally responsible? And I think the other intermediate step, not everybody wants to go volunteer, is also to join a board. There's lots of nonprofits that are environmentally focused or do projects around the environment that are looking for young professionals, people with finance skills, law, HR, everything, to be joining their board and be bringing their talents to help support the work of their organization. So I think that that's also a really good way to get to know the field.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for those answers. Those are really insightful, and it kind of is good to know that you don't need to just go straight forward into that. You can kind of dabble and be internally, a water steward inside of your community and inside of your organization. So that's cool. But I'm going to ask some questions from the audience. I'll just go in order. So this is for Shilpa. How does Surge support the community in maintaining these wells and water technologies long term? What was the ROI for investing in water that was mentioned earlier? It's from Tegan.
Sure. So Tegan, to answer that question, so we, when we talk about sustainability with our programs, I mentioned this earlier, but basically we make sure that it's the community, the members of the community that know how to build the water source, whatever, just talk about a well, for example. And so just to add more color to this, like, we work in Uganda in the districts of Kabramaida and Kalaki. It's about 222,000 people that live there. And every single time we have a source that we're fixing or rehabilitating, we actually, just little side note there, we end up fixing more wells than building, because 5 out of 10 wells in the world are broken in the developing world. So we, just from a sustainability standpoint, instead of going and drilling a new well, we go and fix the existing ones. So even before going to fix that well, there's something like we form a water user committee. Right? And so this water user committee is responsible for mobilizing all the water users, and the water users then vote for, just like any organization that you might have been part of, they vote for a chair, a vice chair, a treasurer, a secretary, and they form an actual organization. And that organization is responsible for working alongside us, like hand in hand with the infrastructure piece of it and the project implementation, but most importantly beyond. So they'll do things like they'll decide for their community, like, okay, we're going to charge everybody 50 cents every time that's a really high number. So like 2 cents every time you're using the well, and they'll start collecting these funds. And it's those funds that they'll put together to eventually fix a pump or replace a pipe. Also, we make sure that they know that they have a way to access the hardware. Anytime something's broken, we do a lot of training. So we have water user committee trainings 6 months, 1 year, 2 years after a well has been fixed. We would, we're just in the process of planning a well technician training, and then COVID came in the way, so we couldn't gather. So we spend a lot of time focused on the ongoing maintenance, but it's not us, it's not Surge doing it, it's the community. So training local people to be able to continue. And then the second part of that question, Tegan, which was the infrastructure, it's a, you know, we have not measured this directly, but the statistics out there from the World Bank and the UN, it's basically a $1 investment in infrastructure for water relates to like $3 to $4 to $34 ROI. And that is, when you think about it, right? If someone's, you just think about the advantages to an economy when you're not spending 6 kilometers walking every day to go collect water. So what are you going to do in that time? You might farm, get more vegetables, and go sell it in a market, right? Think about the advances in education. If you stay in school, what jobs can that bring to you? If your waters are not if you're not sick, you're not spending money on healthcare or medicine. So it's just and then there are obviously more advanced things in terms of infrastructure. So there's been a lot of studies done, and then we've seen anecdotally in our communities that like people are the community members, water users are talking about benefits that they have seen economically because of infrastructure put in place in their villages.
Thank you, Shilpa. Next question is for Patrick. How can the heating, treating, and pumping of water become more efficient to use less electricity? Tegan as well. Maybe.
Interesting question. So I think one of the main, there's two different thoughts on this one. So number one, it's basically using less water, right? Whether it's in your home or your business, look at how you're using water within your home. How often do you run that dishwasher that's half full? How often do you do a load of laundry that's half a load? Do you brush your teeth with the water running? I mean, those are all just small little samples of how water is being misused in the home. So think about that. The district, MWRD, they've got a rain barrel program where you can pick up rain barrels at a local district facility and put those in your yard to capture rainwater and use that to water your garden, to water your plants, so on and so forth. So looking at ways to capture and reuse rainwater, stormwater on site. So that's what you can do as an end user. But there's an issue between the water treatment facility and the end user, and that's the infrastructure in between. And we've seen, especially in cities, older cities like Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, Boston, New York, a lot of that infrastructure is leaking. So there's an exceptional amount of water that's going through all that process of being extracted, pumped, cleaned, treated, and pumped out. And before it gets to your home or your business, it's leaking out into the ground. So I know Chicago has been on several projects here, I think multi-billion-dollar projects actually, to replace over 900 miles of water infrastructure in the city itself. So that's another avenue that we can use to try and reduce water consumption, because if we're extracting all that water and treating it and pushing it out, it's not getting to the end user, that's a big issue. So I would say those are probably two of the best ways to try and reduce energy in water.
Thanks, Patrick. And next question.
Sorry, I just want to add, Patrick, with something we talked about in the planning call too. There's just, I don't know if there's another place for this, but everybody just also please pay attention to the virtual water that you're using. So the things that you purchase, such as like the gallons it takes for the steak that you would eat, or the jeans that you would produce, like you would wear, or you know, just all of your choices. Every time you buy something or eat something, you are consuming water, and probably way more than you realize. So if there's homework for everybody, just Google like some water footprint calculator, because it will shock you. And it's not just the steak that you eat. It's the processing of, like, looking after the cow, processing the meat, getting it to your home. So, you know, changing your choices like daily choices can significantly make an impact on water consumption.
Yep, great point.
And what was that calculator called, Shilpa?
Well, I was just saying Google a water footprint calculator, but I'm sure I don't know if a specific one. There used to be apps out there, but the information is quite widely I mean, maybe as you guys are talking, I'll try and find a website. That's one I can recommend.
You can actually go to, so I did this earlier for World Water Day this year, an education project around water footprint. Yeah, like making choices, like Shilpa said, of eating chicken or salmon instead of beef for one meal can save over 1,000 gallons of water. You know, not buying that extra pair of jeans, things like that. And so we had engaged schools and communities earlier this year for World Water Day around reducing water footprint. And we did launched a 1 million gallon challenge. And so we had people do it for one day, and we had people save 1 million gallons just in Chicago, save 1 million gallons of water in one day. So we have a calculator on our website. Actually, if you go to milliongallonchallenge.com, we still have it up. We launched it for World Water Day in March, but we have that up. And there's a number of them out there if you Google water footprint. But it's a really important point that we think so much about, you know, the water that we see, right? And so things that oftentimes are really hard for people to build into their lifestyle, of taking a short shower or not watering their lawn, and these different things that save, you know, 5 or 10 gallons at a time, you know, turning the water off while you brush your teeth. There are things, much easier choices like eating, you know, vegetarian for a day that can save thousands of gallons of water at one time. It's just not the water that we see.
Then next question is for Shilpa. Why did you choose to focus specifically on those 4 countries? What sorts of characteristics make you choose them over other countries you've worked in, Mike Leteau?
Sure. So what drives us is our model, right? So when we started work, 2008, we didn't have the model we did today. We didn't have that same focus on sustainability. As I mentioned earlier, I was sort of learning on the job here. So once I learned important, valuable information on how to create a sustainable long-term model where a solution can serve generations to come, we looked at the countries we were working in, and we decided that, you know, like it was the biggest factor for success here is the strength of our local partner. So we looked at where we had the strongest partners, where we shared values. And, you know, some of the values that are important to Surge, for example, would be you need to serve everybody regardless of religion, race, like the non-discrimination value, right? And a lot of organizations in our space happen to be religious. So like that would be something that you know, helps us focus in. Obviously looking at the issues, the logistics in the country, the stability, why we chose those countries even as part of the 11. There's long stories behind each of them, but really what's more important is when we finally decided to narrow down and focus in, it was value alignment with local partners who are truly like, you know, just this joint, like side by side, hand in hand, implementation, delivery, strategic, like we plan everything together. So you have to have a great relationship with who you're working with, especially since we're so far away. So a lot of trust goes into it. A lot of, yeah, I mean, trust is probably one of the biggest thing. And then they have to prove themselves that they can deliver on our growth and like what's going to be coming to their communities.
All right, and next question, let's see here. Josina, why do some municipalities make it illegal to collect rainwater for residential use?
So one thing I've learned going into government is oftentimes, right, the people who go into government, water or environmental sustainability is not their #1 job, and it's not the #1 qualification that they got hired to do. You know, even at MWRD, we're a 130-year-old agency. I'm the first urban planner to ever be elected to the board. And so, you know, again, it's important to get people with these types of backgrounds, but especially when you go to local municipalities in suburban Cook County, you know, some of these are villages, communities of maybe 10,000 people. They're lucky if they have a roads and bridges person on staff, let alone a water infrastructure or, you know, water engineer on staff that really understands and can kind of engage in green infrastructure and some of these really basic things like rain barrels and permeable pavers and things like that. And, you know, one thing when you go into government is you realize how much is about liability. There's kind of a culture in government, you know, we say, unfortunately, right, nobody wants to be first, everybody wants to be second in government because nobody wants to take the risk to kind of step out and do something that nobody's done before. They want to see somebody else do it, either fail or succeed, and then decide if they want to adopt these kind of safer practices as a municipality. You know, again, these local governments just don't have the capacity to be up on all of the new technology and things like that. And oftentimes their primary framework for changing, you know, their zoning or their different green codes around green infrastructure and different stormwater technologies is really around liability. And if they don't know it and they don't understand it, they're not going to change it and bring new stuff in. And so, like, I live in a village and I'm very active in my village, and I can't, it's still illegal to have a permeable pavement driveway in Skokie. And it's not because the mayor or the village necessarily don't like permeable pavers. They don't have the capacity to bring somebody on to make sure that they can create the right building code and protections around it, that there wouldn't be additional liability. I mean, it's really kind of an unfortunate thing about how oftentimes local government works, and the culture of it is that a lot of these new things they're not even new anymore, but government is kind of oftentimes the last ones to adopt it. And that really hurts industry, because there's a lot of people who have, like, Sloan valves that have these different technologies and tools that can really save water or be good for the environment. But if the local municipalities can't engage with it or prohibit it, then it really kind of slows that growth, even if you develop the popular demand for it. So it's something that we've really been concerned about. I've been working, again, as an urban planner and somebody who lives in suburban Cook on developing we're calling it kind of a green book of some model stormwater and green infrastructure policies and practices that would be more plug and play as national models and language that's been vetted in terms from a legal framework, so they can not worry as much about liability, for smaller municipalities to take these as model policies and put them into their ordinances and codes pretty easily, instead of each municipality having to hire, have a legal team that tries to get down to doing the same research and the same kind of conclusions around best practices. But it's a big challenge. I mean, we've got so many municipalities that, at most maybe have 10 staff, and they just can't keep up.
Thanks for that, Josina. Next question is for Patrick. Outside of future rate increases, what do you see as other major drivers for commercial water conservation projects in typically lower cost areas like Illinois?
Good question. Codes are always very slow to move, unfortunately. So I don't see codes really pushing water use to decline. I think it's going to be, today's youth and young professionals are very well educated, and they're very demanding, and they know exactly what they want. I think you're seeing young talent looking for different things from the companies that they're working for. They want to know that they're sustainable companies, whether they're using less energy, less water, investing in solar or wind power. I think that's going to be a partial driver going forward. Another one, when you consider the fact, we talked about this a couple times, about how we sit next to the largest source of open fresh water in the world, yet if you go outside the Lake Michigan water basin, those towns, villages, counties, they can't draw water from Lake Michigan, and they're quickly depleting their aquifers. If you drive 20 miles to the southeast to Joliet, their aquifer is supposed to be dry in the next 10 to 15 years. So it doesn't take that far to get outside of the water basin to really see some dire water futures here. So they just invested, I think, a whole lot of money to purchase water from Indiana. So it's one of those things where water scarcity, we think we sit next to this large surface water outlet. We can just pull from it. In some cases we can, some cases we can't. So I think it's just it's important to be aware of what's going on and really focus on long-term solutions. And when you look at what's going on in the outlying communities of Chicago and Cook, it's pretty surprising.
Great, thank you, Patrick. And I think that's all the questions I'm seeing in the queue here. Does anyone else have any last minute questions, or anyone from NetImpact have any questions before we kind of conclude? Doesn't sound like it. Do you guys have anything you want to plug before we conclude?
This is Neural Ed. Thanks to the panelists, Shilpa, Patrick, Josina, for your expertise and sharing it with this community. If you're thirsty for more on this topic, everybody on this call and your friends and community, there's a whole week of events that are maybe not as great as this, but pretty good. And that's coming up in the last week of September. So September 28th to October 5th, Chicago Water Week. Check out at currentwater.org a calendar of events. Many are free. There's a couple that are paid. And so there's gallons and gallons of information to absorb here. So thanks for joining us. Ed, if you could go to the next slide, I think. Follow us on the channel of your choice, website, Twitter, LinkedIn group, Facebook, etc. Anybody is welcome to join the October 8th event. It's based, I think, out of California, and it'll be about designing for all, bridging the digital divide. And if you have any suggestions for us as an organization or other topics to suggest, just send us an email and look at our blog to get an idea of what we're about. So thank you very much. Thank you, Ed, for a great job in this topic and some excellent learnings, as well as hopefully we'll all be inspired to save water and do better, and let our community know about it as well. And don't forget to vote.
All right, thank you, Neural, and thank you to Shilpa, Patrick, Josina, and everyone on the call. It's truly been an honor and a pleasure to have you, and thank you for your insight and your time.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.